Oh, my decadent darlings, forget the stiff collars of Regency restraint. Welcome to Versailles, where let them eat cake was the least of the indulgences, and the Sun King rose not just in the sky, but in a parade of mistresses who made modern celebrity hookups look positively monastic. Shocking, isn't it? These powdered aristocrats turned the palace into a perpetual orgy of power and pleasure, with brothels backstage and harems hidden in simple sight. If this glimpse into Gallic gallivanting has you fanning yourself furiously, do subscribe at once, my naughty nobles. Confess below, from which debauched dominion are you indulging today? And is it aperitif hour in Amsterdam or absinthe o'clock in Adelaide? Ah, my licentious listeners, let us sashay into the silken scandals of the French Ancien Régime, from the grandiose grandeur of Louis XIV in 1610 to the guillotine's grim curtain call in 1789. Imagine the Regency ton's whispered affairs, but amplified by absolute monarchy. Versailles, that glittering gilded cage, where etiquette demanded you watch the king relieve himself, yet turned a blind eye to his bedding half the court. Hypocrisy? Darling, it was the height of fashion. These shameless sovereigns and their courtiers elevated extramarital excess to an art form, with official mistresses wielding more power than ministers, and the palace pulsing with passions that would make today's tabloids tame. Our tale begins with the institutionalization of the maîtresse en titre, the official royal mistress, a position unique to France, quasi-official and lavishly rewarded. Starting with Agnes Sorel under Charles VII, though our era kicks off later, it blossomed into a tradition. Apartments at court, titles, fortunes, and influence rivaling the Queen's. Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, set the standard with a constellation of lovers. Louise de la Vallière, the pious penitent who bore him children before retreating to a convent, Athénaïs de Montespan, the witty witch accused in the affair of the poisons of black masses and aphrodisiacs to keep his favor, and finally Françoise de Maintenon, the governess turned morganatic wife who tamed him in his dotage. Irony abounds. The king who built Versailles to control his nobles surrounded himself with women who controlled him. Compare to modern power couples. Think a billionaire's string of influences, but with divine right drama and pamphlets proclaiming every dalliance. Yet Louis XIV's court was no prude's paradise. Public life was ritualized spectacle, the levee and coucher, where nobles watched the king rise and retire, but private passions simmered. Courtiers urinated in corridors, yes, darlings, even princesses, while prostitution flourished in the parks. Louis banned soliciting in the gardens, lest his grandeur become a glorified brothel. Sodomy scandals whispered through the shadows, with noblemen caught in Tuileries trysts, and the affair of the poisons, a deliciously deadly drama under Louis XIV, where aristocrats allegedly poisoned rivals with inheritance powders laced with arsenic, all tied to black masses and orgiastic rites. Montespan herself implicated, though cleared, her rivals executed or exiled. It's like a Regency poison plot, but real, with Satan summoned for seduction spells. Fast forward to Louis XV, the libertine king par excellence, whose appetites turned Versailles into a veritable pleasure dome. After Pompadour, that bourgeois beauty elevated to marquise, who transitioned from lover to confidant when health failed her passions, came the infamous Parc aux Cerfs. Not the child harem of legend, girls were teens, not toddlers, but a discreet house in Versailles' Deer Park quarter, stocked with young mistresses procured by valets.
Pompadour herself allegedly orchestrated it to keep the king occupied without court intrigue. He'd summon them via secret stairs to his trebuchet apartment for trysts, twice weekly, like a divine appointment. One famed petite maîtresse, Louise O'Murphy, posed nude for Boucher, her bum immortalized before becoming royal plaything. Modern comparison, a celebrity's private island retreats, but with 18th century secrecy and scandalous pamphlets decrying the king's debauchery. Louis XV's final fling, Madame du Barry, a former prostitute turned countess, scandalized all. Low-born, brazen, she ousted Pompadour's memory and flaunted jewels while France starved. Exiled upon his death from smallpox, caught perhaps in his pursuits, she returned only to meet the guillotine. The irony, these women, empowered by the king's bed, embodied the regime's excess that fueled revolution. Libertinage flourished among the aristocracy, philosophical and fleshly freedom, rebelling against church and crown. Casanova's memoirs detail Parisian conquests. De Sade's extremes pushed boundaries into infamy. Petites maisons, secret townhouses for rendezvous, dotted Paris, where nobles hosted orgies away from Versailles' prying eyes. The Paris Opera, a notorious nest. Ballet girls, those impoverished petite rats, prostituted backstage in the Foyer de la Danse, where wealthy abonnés, subscribers, mingled, sponsoring dancers in exchange for favors. Mothers pimped daughters for contracts. Degas later captured the seedy underbelly, his ballerinas warming up amid leering patrons. And poor Marie Antoinette, arriving as a teenage dauphine, her unconsummated marriage, Louis XV's phimosis delayed delights 7 years, sparked rumors of frigidity, or worse. Pamphlets portrayed her as lesbian, German vice, adulterous with Fersen, even incestuous. The diamond necklace affair sealed her fate. Swindled into seeming complicity for a lavish bauble, it crystallized her as Madame Deficit. Pornographic labels flooded streets, depicting orgies at Petit Trianon. Truth? Likely affairs, but exaggerated to undermine the monarchy. Like today's deepfake scandals, but with revolutionary rage. In essence, my gossips, the Ancien Regime's shameless sexual practices were power plays. Mistresses as political pawns, prostitution as social ladder, libertinage as Enlightenment rebellion. Versailles glittered with desire, but beneath the rouge lurked ruin, excess that toppled thrones. Thus, darlings, French frivolity proves passion pious for kings, perilous for queens, leaving pamphlets aflame and heads rolling. Next, in Part 2, Louis XV's Parc aux Cerfs exposed, Pompadour's plots, and ballet's backstage brothels that pirouetted into infamy. Darlings, if you thought one royal mistress was scandalous, brace yourselves. Louis XV turned the procurement of pretty young things into a state-sponsored side hustle, complete with secret staircases, nude paintings, and a deer park that had nothing to do with hunting stags. It's like running a private Tinder for the king, with valets as swipe-right agents, and the queen politely pretending not to notice. Utterly shameless. Oh, my voluptuous voyagers, let us linger longer in the perfumed corridors of Versailles under the reign of Louis XV, that most indefatigable indulger, whose appetites made his great-grandfather's serial mistresses seem almost restrained. Where Louis XIV had paraded his favorites like glittering trophies for all the court to envy, Louis XV preferred discretion, or at least the illusion of it, transforming the palace into a labyrinth of hidden passages, trapdoors, and private apartments where pleasure could be pursued without the tiresome glare of public scrutiny.
Imagine a powerful king with unlimited money and no real consequences, supported quietly by the machinery of the state. That was Louis XV of France. One of the most whispered secrets of his reign was a place called Parc aux Cerfs. Contrary to scandalous rumors spread by revolutionary pamphlets, it wasn't a hidden palace of horrors. It was a discreet neighborhood near Versailles, named after an old deer park. There, the king bought several modest houses to host his private companions, known as petites maîtresses. These young women usually came from ordinary backgrounds. They were carefully selected by trusted servants, given comfortable living arrangements, and introduced to the king in total secrecy. The system worked like an elite private service. Recruiters searched Paris and the countryside, offering families financial security. In return, the women lived in relative luxury.
fine clothes, jewelry, and protection, but only as long as the king's interest lasted. When it ended, they were typically provided with money, a marriage arrangement, or a place in a convent to ensure stability. Although many blamed Madame de Pompadour, the king's famous official mistress, the operation was actually run by his valet, Dominique Lebel. By the 1750s, Pompadour was no longer romantically involved with the king and preferred discreet, non-political arrangements that wouldn't threaten her influence. Despite popular gossip, there's little evidence she managed the system herself. Louis XV's private apartments were designed for secrecy. Hidden staircases, private entrances, even mechanical lifts. While the king slipped away for private dinners, the court pretended not to notice, and the queen focused on her religious duties. One of the best-known figures linked to Parc aux Cerfs was Marie-Louise O'Murphy, later immortalized in a famous painting by Francois Boucher. The artwork caught the king's attention and became one of the most iconic and controversial images of the era. In the end, Parc aux Cerfs remains a symbol of royal excess, secrecy, and the quiet contradictions of life at Versailles, polished on the surface and deeply complicated beneath.
But Versailles was not the only stage for shamelessness. Paris itself throbbed with libertine excess. The opera ballet, that glittering spectacle, hid a sordid backstage economy. The young dancers, nicknamed petite rats for their scuttling poverty, were preyed upon by wealthy abonnés, gentlemen who purchased season boxes and backstage access. Mothers delivered daughters to these patrons in hopes of securing roles, apartments, even marriages. The foyer de la danse was notorious, mirrors on every wall so gentlemen could admire and proposition from all angles while the girls warmed up. Vestris, Guimard, and other stars amassed fortunes not just from pirouettes, but from protection contracts. Degas would later capture the leering patrons in his paintings, but in the 1750s-80s, it was an open secret everyone pretended to ignore. Meanwhile, the aristocracy embraced philosophical libertinage with gusto. Petites maisons, charming little townhouses tucked away in faubourgs, served as private pleasure retreats, where dukes and marquises hosted orgies far from prying court eyes. Furnished with mirrored ceilings, erotic art, and ingenious furniture, chairs with discreet extensions, these hideaways saw experiments that would make de Sade blush, and he frequently attended. The Marquis himself, imprisoned repeatedly for his excesses, embodied the era's extremes: whipping, sodomy, blasphemy, all justified as rebellion against church hypocrisy. His 120 Days of Sodom, written in the Bastille, reads like a fever dream catalogue of every forbidden act the regime secretly indulged. And poor Marie Antoinette, arriving in 1770 as a giddy Austrian archduchess, found herself married to a dauphin who couldn't or wouldn't consummate for 7 agonizing years. Whispers flew. Was he impotent? Was she frigid? Worse, did she seek satisfaction elsewhere? Pamphlets exploded with pornographic fantasies, the Dauphine in lesbian trysts with Lamballe and Polignac, orgies at the Petit Trianon, even strap-on escapes. When the marriage was finally consummated in 1777, the entire court breathed a sigh of relief, until the Lebels simply switched to accusing her of insatiable adultery with Fersen, Artois, and half the guards. The diamond necklace affair of 1885 poured oil on the fire. Though innocent, she emerged as the greedy harlot who bankrupted France for baubles. Revolutionary propaganda needed no further encouragement. In the end, my delicious debauchees, Louis XV's carefully compartmentalized pleasures and the aristocracy's open libertinage sowed the seeds of their own destruction.
A nation starving while the king played musical beds in his deer park? Unforgivable. When the mob stormed Versailles in 1789, they carried with them decades of accumulated rage at precisely this shamelessness. So, remember, darlings, in the Ancien Régime, the bed was the quickest route to power and the fastest road to the guillotine. Next, in Part 3, Marie Antoinette's libeled loves, the revolutionary pornographers who toppled a queen with ink and innuendo, and the final frantic flings before the blade fell.